But where will we get the money for your treatment? Camille was indignant. Are we millionaires? What kind of surgeries abroad do you need? Where are we going to get so much money? So we've spent almost all our savings on the hospital doctors. It'll be out of the coffers soon. We can't even get enough for the necessities. In 6 months, she was very tired of the situation she found herself in. Stephen did not work, and it was a burden to provide for her husband, who could hardly get out of bed. Every day he grew weaker and weaker, and she was torn between work and family. It was unbearable. During the time that Stephen had been trying unsuccessfully to treat the cancer he had suddenly been diagnosed with, Camille had been sleeping at best 2 a night. This had been going on for months now, and she felt that she was losing more and more control over the situation and herself. So we have money for your France, but not for my treatment. That's how you get to die, darling, Stephen resented. So your career is more valuable to you than your own husband? I never thought you'd turn out to be such a cynical person. Work really was everything to Camille. She wanted to do well, and that took effort. Stephen never understood her aspirations, but since he had fallen in love with her, there was nothing he could do about it. By the age of 25, Camille had traveled half of Europe, covered the most grandiose large-scale events in the social spheres of different countries. She aspired to be among the best journalists in the country. This was a matter of principle for her. A few years ago, it all started with involvement in ordinary social issues. Camille always had an interest not only in her own but also in social life. She was convinced that she could influence the course of events in the world, so after school she tried to pass the exams as best as possible to enter the faculty of journalism, which due to the great competition was very difficult to do. But she succeeded. Already in her second year, she got a job at a regional television station, and a year later she was traveling all over the country on business trips. By the end of her 5th year, when her classmates were just beginning to think about employment, Camille's management was already sending her on business trips abroad. Her mother was proud of her daughter, and when she decided to marry, she discouraged her in every possible way. "Why do you need it?" Wendy asked. "And most importantly, who are you going to marry? Look at him. He's a characterless lazybones." "He's just a lazy bastard. How will you live with him? What's a man like that for?" They met Stephen by chance. One evening Camille's headset broke, and the next morning the girl had a serious negotiation scheduled. Having dropped everything, she ran to a nearby store, which by that time had already closed. "Girl, our working hours ended 5 minutes ago," said the young man, as Camille pounded hard on the door, demanding to be opened. "Please, I beg you very much," she asked in a rather harsh tone that did not tolerate objections. "You have an extra 5 minutes, and my whole life could go down the drain because of this." Stephen gave in and opened the door for her. "I'll be right outside. Camille, I've only got 2 pairs of headphones. I kept thinking I'd buy a spare, and I almost didn't have any. It happens." Stephen realized he was attracted to her, but he didn't even realize how much. All the next day, the attractive brunette with dark eyes, serious expression, and assertiveness not inherent in such young girls did not leave his mind. He thought about her, and in his heart hoped that someday she would come to the store again, and he would be able to meet her. And it had happened. 2 weeks later, he was the most ordinary young man who a few years ago had not gotten enough points to enter the faculty of management. And after serving a year in the army, as he should, Stephen got a job at a store close to home to save up money for his studies. He wanted to get an education and achieve something in life. His mother supported him in everything. Even though she was upset that her son could not enter the institute right after graduation, she never spoke about it openly. "You will definitely succeed." Evelyn's affirmative tone was Stephen's main support. But the goodwill with his mother came to an abrupt end when he decided to get married. After meeting Camille, they had a serious and extremely unpleasant conversation. "Stephen, I don't want you to think I'm interfering in your life. But you have to understand, this girl is no match for you." Evelyn was talking. "She's from another world entirely. She's got enormous ambition. A woman like that would bring misery to a family. She's 25 years old and she doesn't want children. I don't think she's around much. She's away on business. You won't be happy with her, believe me. And take your mother's advice." She raised him alone. That's why her son's happiness was the most important thing in her life. She didn't want him to commit his life to a girl for whom family would never come first. Evelyn had never considered her own life experiences. Like so many other girls, she got married at an early young age. At the time, she had barely finished her freshman year. And when she met Christopher, she made the decision to devote herself to her family. A year after they met, Evelyn became pregnant. And when her son was born, she not only cooked, washed, and cleaned, but also took care of the child, while her husband continued to study and did not bring a penny to the house. They lived at her mother's house, who out of kindness let her daughter's husband into the apartment. "It was only for the sake of the child," she said. "If it weren't for the grandson, he wouldn't be here. Not only does he do nothing around the house, but he lives at our expense from his parents. At best, a few dollars a month would bring in a few dollars, and all the stipend would go to live." She was very dissatisfied with her daughter's choice. Such a son-in-law woman categorically did not suit. But there was nothing she could do about it. When Christopher received a diploma, they divorced. It turned out that such an early creation of a family was a big mistake. He's not going to live with Evelyn. Raising a child will take up too much time, which could negatively affect his career. And, after all, he is just starting his professional path, and all his attention should be focused on work. I told you not to get involved with him. Jenna was very much worried about her daughter and could not hide her indignation after the act of her son-in-law. When he reported that he filed for divorce, the woman threw his things down the stairs. "I don't want you to set foot here again," she shouted at the whole entryway, "and you can't go near your son. They'll only stick their noses in." At night, Evelyn sobbed into her pillow, and in the morning she got up as if nothing had happened and took care of her little son, to whom she tried hard not to show her emotions. She was sure that children felt everything, and if she peed, her son would be nervous. When the boy turned 5 years old, Jenna had a serious conversation with her daughter. "Cole, we should put Stephen in daycare," she said. "Let at least 2 years before school and the group will be in the team. Get used to, specialize. And you need to decide on your future. You can't go back to the institute, and you don't have time for full-fledged studies. You have to work. Of course, we can continue to live on my savings, but it's not a solution. We should at least take some courses, get a job somewhere." Evelyn realized her mother was right. There was nothing to wait for, nothing to do. Since the divorce, Christopher hadn't made a single attempt to see his son. Didn't call, didn't write, didn't visit, and, of course, didn't pay child support. "We should sue." Jenna went on. "Why are you acting so proud? If he has an official salary, he'll pay like a sweetheart. Mom's not going anywhere." "But what court?" Evelyn answered her. "Am I going to be disgraced? It is humiliating to beg money from the ex-husband, with whom you not only divorced, but who you, despicable, brazenly left you. There's nothing humiliating about it. He did the deed. Now let him pay. You're not in a position to be throwing money around. He'll get all his debts from all those years ago. It'll give him something to fall back on." Jenna kept having this conversation until she managed to get her way. A few months later, Christopher was awarded child support, after which he appeared in his son's life and filed a countersuit. He insisted that Evelyn was obligated to allow him to have contact with the child and she could not legally interfere with the court's decision. "Mom, look where this is going." The daughter was indignant. "This is what your desire to get child support from him has brought you to. Now he will turn Stephen against me. Let them meet in your presence." "I don't see the problem," the mother replied. "Stephen, when he grows up, will not want to socialize with him." But Jenna was wrong. Stephen became more and more attached to his father and not at all, and socializing with him. As a teenager, he spent more time with Christopher than with his own mother, but his father didn't help him in any way. "Maybe you could ask your father to pay for your education," said Evelyn, "when Stephen could not enter the institute on a budget. If you enroll by correspondence, you will be able to avoid being drafted into the army." But Stephen flatly refused. "I won't ask him for anything," he replied. "It's not right. I'm a grown-up man and should cope with my problems myself." When Christopher learned of his son's failure, he did not even offer his help. He had never invested a penny in the child in his entire life. And except for regular communication, Stephen saw nothing from him. Evelyn, who immediately after graduation got a job as an accountant and provided her son with everything he needed. It was annoying, but she could not influence Stephen in any way. "I love you both. he told his mother when she expressed her dissatisfaction with another act of Christopher. "I am very glad that I can communicate with both Mom and Dad." Unlike Evelyn, Christopher approved of his son's choice. He believed that parents have no right to interfere in the private lives of adult children. "If you love her and feel that you are a good couple and you can start a family, then get married," he said. "I don't understand your mother at all, but what does she care? After all, these are your mistakes and no one else's. But even if your divorce doesn't work out, marry someone else. We're not living in the Middle Ages." Christopher himself never got married after his divorce from Evelyn. At first there was no time, all the time occupied by work, and then Christopher realized that he did not need it. He really liked the free, unencumbered life, and the older he got, the more convinced he became that his marriage to Evelyn was untimely and a mistake. He was glad he was divorced. Evelyn, too, had suffered him for a long time, but had never been able to find a life partner. She devoted all her time to work and raising her son, and Jenna supported her daughter in this decision. "You don't need to get married anymore," she used to say. "You've been burned once, and that's enough." Men, they're all like that. Today they are, tomorrow they are not. And we don't need women with children of our own, not with other men's children. Sometimes Evelyn suffered from loneliness. She realized that sooner or later Stephen would get married and leave her parents' nest. And that's one of the reasons why she took her son's wedding so painfully. "Mom, you saw that girl. She's been discussed a lot. Jenna, my son's fiancée. Well, she's a completely different kind of girl. My Stephen is no match for a king. A family needs a girl who's modest, quiet, well-behaved. This one's a careerist. I can't imagine how they'll live together." Right after the wedding, Camille and Stephen rented an apartment. He wasn't too happy about it, but he didn't dare to argue with his new wife. "I will not live with your mother under the same roof," Camille said firmly. "You know how she feels about me. And your apartment is small. Your grandmother lives there too. But what kind of family is that when I'm not my own boss in my own house? No, we're going to live separately, and that's out of the question." Evelyn resented the decision. After the move, she called her son every day, and once again, when she heard that Camille was not at home, she decided to ask a frank and tough question. "Why did you marry her at all, son? She doesn't cook, she doesn't do laundry, she doesn't clean. She doesn't even sleep with you, for that matter. When do you have time to do that when she's always traveling on her business trips? She's probably got someone else there. What about kids? When is she going to have kids? She's not getting any younger. She doesn't even think about the most important things." Hearing his mother's words, Stephen felt very hurt. He wanted a normal, full-fledged family, children, his own home, comfort. But Camille he sincerely loved, and in his head, even for a second, could not imagine how all this was possible without her. Evelyn argued for a long time that if family life does not work out, then it is necessary to divorce. But Stephen ignored everything she said. He was glad of the rare evenings they spent together, the weekends that always came so suddenly. If Camille called to say that she was going on vacation for 2 days, Stephen would immediately take off work to spend time with her. It was only after 5 years of marriage that Stephen decided to talk to his wife about children. "Camille, but you and I are not getting any younger," he said calmly. "You're already 30 years old. It's time, then it will be too late. Before you know it, the years will fly by and you won't have children. I want a normal family, full-fledged, so that we had heirs, and preferably not just one child, but at least 2. I don't understand. What do you want from me?" Camille was angry. "As if when you got married you didn't know I wasn't going to become a chicken on a net. By the way, I'm not the one who came on to you. You could have ignored me in the first place. And believe me, I wouldn't have lost anything." Camille was becoming increasingly aware that she was sick of this marriage. She had never aspired to be married. Relationships existed for her in some parallel universe. In all the years before she met Stephen, she had never dated a man for more than a year. Then she began to get bored with all the talk of domesticity and the other minutiae of life, which came up more and more often. She had so many important things to do that she had no time to think seriously about her family and children. She had married Stephen out of boredom. She wanted to know what it was like to be married, to live as a family, and she felt that he would be more suited to that role than anyone else. There was no love on her part. She felt sympathy for him, But this feeling had nothing to do with the inner depth of her soul. She had thought about divorce long before Stephen had received the dreaded diagnosis. But there had been no occasion. And since she spent almost all her time at work, trying to win even higher positions in journalism, the problems in the family did not irritate her at all. It just didn't concern her. She didn't think about it because she was entirely focused on projects and business. When Camille returned from another business trip, she saw her husband sitting in the kitchen with his arms around his head. In front of him was a shot glass, and the wife immediately guessed that it was not water. "What are you doing? Have you started drinking here?" she asked. Throws off his sneakers, jacket in the hallway. "What happened?" "Well, I've been pining for a month. I can't eat anything. I just want to sleep all the time. I'm in a lot of pain. I feel very bad," he answered calmly. "You've been away all this time, so you don't know." "Of course not. You can start blaming me again. By the way, I want to remind you that the main part of the money in our family is contributed by me for this apartment, is also paid by me. I earned all the money we put in the piggy bank. Your paycheck covers food at best, and not every month. I've been working like a horse. I can't see the light of day, and you dare reproach me for something. Really? If you're in pain, see a doctor, maybe a paid one." "I already went." "What did the doctor say? Is that why you're so upset?" "The doctor determined from the tests that it's cancer. It's going to require expensive surgery. Then recovery, then nursing." "I quit my job." Those words were like a cold shower for Camille. She didn't even know what to say. No sympathy. There was no compassion in her. She was too tired to have any feelings. The only thing she had experienced the moment Stephen had informed her of the illness was anger. She was angry that she couldn't leave now because it would be wrong and ugly. The fact that she would now have to pull the whole family on her back, a far-reaching reality, also pissed her off. If she had seen the prospects clearly before, now they were very vague. "But I'm so lucky to be married," she thought to herself. "Did you tell your grandmother's mother?" Camille asked. "What did they say?" "Yes, I did." Her mother was in shock, sobbing into the phone for half an hour. She can't find a place to be. Grandma's not herself either. "Camille, what can they say?" "Think about it. You ask such strange questions. For God's sake," the husband said. "Stephen, that's not what I meant. I'm talking about whether or not they're willing to financially contribute to your treatment. Or do you think I'm printing rubber money? Yes, I make a very respectable salary. But please don't forget that you and I are renting. We have a lot of other expenses, and all the money I've been saving, we were planning to spend on an apartment." Listening to her, Stephen couldn't believe his ears. From his lips sounded such cynical words that it was incomprehensible. What apartment? What money? What is she even carrying? How can she be so indifferent to you? "I don't care about me at all." Asking this question, he did not hope to hear a positive answer. Who would say such a thing to a person's face? But by the expression on her face, he clearly saw and understood everything. That evening, he went to bed on a cot for the first time in the years he had lived together. He was very offended and hurt, and he wasn't going to hide his emotions. "You're welcome," said Camille, guiding the blanket under the quilt. "Do you think I'm going to take you by the hand and drag you to the bed? You can sleep wherever you want, on the cot or on the mattress on the floor. Sleep on the bed. You're not going to be happy with the heat outside, and about not caring. If I did, I probably wouldn't be asking you about how much money you need and whether your parents will contribute to the cost. I need to plan a budget because I'm in charge of all the financial matters in our family. In case you've forgotten, of course, you also have a father. As far as I know, he's not a poor man. He could help you too. You're just not grown up yet, Stephen. Emotionally immature. Your worldview is about feelings and emotions. Mine is about reality and practicality. So it's debatable who doesn't like who." She lay down on the bed and fell asleep instantly. He lay awake all night pondering her words, let him go wherever he wanted. Evelyn said, to your son to persuade her to forget her, as if she had never been in your life. She wanted to go to France, you see, not to care about her husband, not to care about her family. All she wants to do is run her journalistic business. Son, you must realize that people like her will go over your head, and she won't notice you. She doesn't care at all. Even if you die here, she won't be upset. She'll find someone else in a few months, and in a year she won't even remember your name." Stephen was very hurt to hear his mother say that, but deep down he realized that she was right. They had had such a bad talk with Camille at leisure that he was coming more and more to the conclusion that she did not need him at all. "What have you decided about our conversation yesterday?" she asked in the morning. "As soon as Stephen wakes up, you will find out from your father if he is going to participate financially in your treatment. I've been paying for everything on my own for 6 months now, and to tell you the truth, I'm really tired. I'm taking the rest of the money, because in 2 weeks I'm going to France, where I'll need something to live on for at least 3 months, maybe even longer. During the whole time my son was sick and hardly ever got out of bed because of his severe headaches, Christopher never offered to help me financially. In conversations he avoided this issue, trying not to touch the subject, so as not to have an open conflict with Camille." Stephen finally decided to talk to his father, but in response he heard something that forever left a negative trace in his mind. "Why should I give money?" Christopher asked in surprise. "You are an adult, and you have a family with a wife. You and her as a couple should support each other in difficult situations. Or does Camille not have enough money? As far as I know, she makes a decent living, and you have plenty of savings." "I do. We'll have enough for a year, and then we'll see. Maybe this operation doesn't make any sense at all. We still have to call clinics abroad, gather all the information." Stephen was shocked by his father's answer. He did not expect that even he would refuse to support him in such a difficult situation. After this conversation, for the first time in many years, Evelyn decided to intervene in their relationship. "And here's the father, isn't it?" she asked. "Christopher is outside the house. Do you have the right to call yourself a father? You have no conscience. Your son is dying and you won't even lift a finger." "I do not understand your claims, Christopher," he calmly replied. "If the situation was desperate and you didn't have a penny of money, of course, like any other normal person, I would help. For my son's sake, I would take off my shirt. But you're asking me for money just for the sake of asking, aren't you? Camille just doesn't want to give all her money to Stephen anymore. She's going to France, she's got some long business trip, an event, a job. I can understand that. How long has it been since he was diagnosed? And nothing's changed in that time. The disease has been going on and on and on. There's no prognosis. As far as I know, they said the tumor will gradually grow. So who needs this treatment and why? What good would it do except waste money?" Camille threw away a few $1 million. "Now you want me to give you the same amount? Honestly, that's a very strange attitude. I don't understand you." Christopher was really convinced that Stephen's treatment was ineffective and there was no point in paying for it any further. But he didn't want to understand and accept that money was needed for a thorough examination abroad. It was too complicated and expensive. It would take a lot of effort and time. Christopher was not morally prepared for it. He was always satisfied with the communication with his son, but without material investments and all these manipulations if you refuse to do something, give money or pay for something, then bad Father Christopher considered himself a good father, because he was convinced that the most important thing in family relationships is communication and support. "You can sell the apartment," he said. "You have a nice big apartment, you and Mom can exchange it for a smaller space and spend the difference on Stephen's treatment. When the money runs out, I'll get involved. Until then, I'm sorry, but I don't see the point. You can't even decide what you need and what you want as a result. Didn't you say he should be hospitalized here? Then go to Europe. You'll have to make up your own mind." The doctors said one thing and another and didn't give any prognosis. "Unfortunately, cancer diseases are getting younger," said a leading specialist of the medical center after another examination. "If a few decades ago it was impossible to imagine that a person of such a young age would face such a serious disease, now it is commonplace." The indifference of doctors did not surprise them either. Both Evelyn and Jenna realized that there were dozens of people like Stephen, and if you worry deeply about each person's story, no amount of energy and nerves would be enough for the job. "I don't care what they all want," Jenna told her daughter as they sat in the kitchen drinking tea. "Our job is to cure Stephen, and Camille can go wherever she wants. I can't even talk about Christopher in peace. I've told you everything about him in my time. You made a very big mistake when you married him, but unfortunately, it can't be undone. You can't cut him out of your life. Evelyn shared her mother's feelings. When she talked to Christopher, she noticed how cold, indifferent his eyes were. If in his youth he had only the rudiments of selfishness, which he was afraid to develop lest he displease strangers, in adulthood the lowest human qualities were finally formed in him. He was not only selfish, he was the kind of person who was ready to watch his relatives and close people die, as long as they did not touch him. 2 weeks later, Camille flew to France. When she approached Stephen to say goodbye, he turned his back to the wall. "Don't pretend you're asleep," she said. "I saw you awake this morning." "Stephen, let's have a human conversation. I have a flight in 0300. I was early so I wouldn't be late. There's still time to spare." He continued to lie in bed, staring off into the distance. Meanwhile, Camille kept talking to him. "All right, let's say I drop everything and stay." There was sarcasm in her voice, but she tried to hide it and pretend that she was as worried about leaving as he was. "What's waiting for me here? I'll have to quit my job, take care of you 24 a day, change your diapers, because very soon you won't be able to even go to the bathroom by yourself. In a few months we will run out of money, go into debt, and live in bondage. There's no telling how long it will be before you're cured and back on your feet, if ever. I will no longer be able to go back to work and catch up on my work. The train will be gone forever. But do you really want me to live like that? I certainly don't wish it for myself. I'm sorry. Your mother and grandmother can take care of you while I work. I didn't say I wouldn't send you money. I'll continue to help you financially, but no more." She kept her word, and a few weeks after she left, she transferred a portion of her fee to Evelyn's account. But each time the sums became smaller and smaller. Camille spent the rest of her savings on rented accommodation, which she had to pay for several months' rent on arrival, and other household expenses. Camille, why so little this time?" asked Evelyn when they called each other. "Stephen and I barely have enough money to pay for doctor's fees and medicine. I thought you would send Shin at least as much as you did last time." "Look, I'm not rubber either. Please understand this," she replied irritably. "Life abroad is much more expensive than in Russia. I'm already working my ass off. The apartment alone is worth it, not to mention all the other expenses. And I need to save something too. When I come back, what will we live on?" "You don't work?" "Stephen, neither. Christopher's not going to help pay for my treatment. It's going to be on me again." Evelyn didn't understand why she had to pay all the travel expenses herself. "Maybe you could talk to your employer and get at least part of it reimbursed," she asked Camille a month before she left. "Could you leave that amount for Stephen and me? Tell him your husband is ill. They must be able to understand your situation if you are such a valuable specialist and they want to cooperate with you." But Camille replied with a flat refusal. "No, I won't do it under any circumstances," she said. "Do you want me to air all my underwear at work in front of my colleagues? That's out of the question. About her husband's illness, they do not know and will not find out anything at all. Family matters are none of their business. Could you get a job, by the way? You're not that old and you've been at home for years. Jenna could look after Stephen and you and I could earn some money, see if we could get on with it." In response to Camille, Evelyn kept silent. She tried not to anger her sister-in-law, whom she could hardly stand in spirit, but needed her. For there was no one but Camille to pay the expenses of Stephen, who was growing more and more infirm every day. And Camille was gradually drifting away from the family. And it wasn't just about work. At one of the events, she met a very interesting man. When he came up to greet her, she was surprised at first. He didn't understand a word of Russian and could only speak in his native French, which Camille knew enough to keep the conversation going. Bernard was a local businessman. He had spent his entire life in France. Here he had been born, raised, educated, and organized a wine business. They talked all evening, and in the morning, when Bernard walked Camille back to her apartment, she didn't even remember what they had discussed. For the first time in a long time, she felt truly free and happy. It was only the day after the event, when she finally had the only day off in a long time and was able to be alone with herself and immerse herself in her own thoughts, that she realized how much. She was tired of all the circumstances that had been thrust upon her. She was tired of pulling her sick husband out of a sense of duty and compassion, tired of listening to the reproaches of his mother and grandmother, tired of everything that had surrounded me for the past 6 months. Unnoticeably, she dialed her mother's number and hearing her mother's voice in the receiver told me I really need to consult with you. Is it convenient for you to talk now? Having listened carefully to her daughter, Wendy said to Camille, not even thinking about it. I told you back when you were married that you and he weren't a couple, but you wouldn't listen to me, although I was always sure you never even loved him. You were just interested in starting a family. Did you start one? I didn't think about the consequences. And now, why do you need it? A burden. You don't want to have to pay for treatment that doesn't work. And if he dies, then his mother and his grandmother will chew you up, and all the dogs with way like them. Whatever you give them, it's not enough. His daddy's praiseworthy, didn't give his son a penny. It's all on your shoulders. Let them sell their apartment, get an operation, whatever they want. It shouldn't concern you anymore. And if things work out with the Frenchman, that's just great. I've always dreamed of you going to live abroad. The relationship developed rapidly. Romance Camille and Bernard was so bright and passionate that a week after the beginning of their relationship, all colleagues knew about it. Camille surprised herself if, living with Stephen, she did not have time to do anything around the house, because she came back from work as a squeezed lemon and only wanted to sleep. Then next to Bernard, it was as if she felt stronger. Even though she only slept 2-3 hours a night, she managed to do everything. Even romantic home-cooked dinners became commonplace for them, and Camille cooked delicious French dishes every day with great pleasure, gradually learning the cuisine of a new and unexplored country. For a whole month, she did not think about anything but her relationship with Bernard and their future life together. But her happiness was interrupted by a phone call. This time it wasn't Evelyn, but Stephen himself. Camille, I would like to clarify when you will return to Russia, he asked without any preamble. You said you were going away for 3 months, and the last month has just begun. I want to know when you plan to come back. Mom said you sent very little money last time, but we barely had enough for anything. And we're still planning to go to Europe for a checkup. This is my last chance, you must understand that. Her husband's words made Camille very angry. She suddenly felt so angry. No, you have to say something like that. Mom and I want to understand. I've understood him for over 6 months now, and no thanks. I feel like it's my fault that he got sick and I owe him for life. She thought to herself. Stephen, I'm not coming. She answered calmly after a moment of silence in the telephone receiver. I'm getting married and staying in France. We'll try to formalize the divorce remotely, so that there was no unnecessary red tape. After these words, she hung up the phone and only after a few seconds realized that she had said it. So openly and directly, without any embarrassment or pussyfooting around. Suddenly she felt so relieved. She had finally cut the knot that had been so tight around her neck that she sometimes found it hard to breathe. She was sure that now her life would turn out completely differently, and she had no idea what really lay ahead of her. Okay, I agree to give money for the operation, Christopher said, but on one condition, I will call the clinics myself and arrange everything myself. I don't want to waste money. There was nothing left but to agree. It was their only opportunity. To save Stephen and not take it, they had no right. For 2 weeks, Christopher, together with an interpreter, communicated with representatives of foreign clinics. And only after on the website of one of them found reviews of successful experience of similar operations, recovery. Informed Evelyn that he was ready to book tickets while he was still in transport. Gotta go, he said. They have to help him. But you realize we can't all go together. Not only the treatment, but also the accommodation is very expensive. Stephen must be accompanied by one person. It won't be me, because I've got my own work to do. And I don't have the opportunity to be away for so long. I think Evelyn should go. Because Jenna, no offense, but you realize you're not young anymore. What if something happens and you don't even have insurance? The women agreed with Christopher. A week later, Evelyn and Stephen flew to Germany. The man was immediately placed in a single room, and Evelyn went to live in a hotel. She was so worried about her son that she could not find a place to be. It seemed to her that the operation and recovery would take forever, which she would spend locked in 4 walls, because she did not know the language. Christopher had hired an interpreter only to communicate with the medical staff. He had the foresight not to spend on his ex-wife's leisure activities because he didn't feel obliged to do so. In the few months they spent in Germany, Christopher only called 3 times. The first was to find out how they had gotten there, and if everything was all right. The second is to ask how the surgery went, and the third to ask how long the therapy would take. When the doctor told her that the operation had been a success, Evelyn calmed down. For the first time in a long time, she had hoped that her son would recover and be able to return to his old life. He was very thin, pale in the garden head. It pained her to look at him, but she tried her best to hide her emotions so as not to upset her son. Evelyn realized that she had to be a support for him, not a tearful burden that would add to an already difficult emotional situation. With her bad mood, the woman surrounded her son with care while they were abroad and after their return to Russia. Every day Stephen felt better and better, but his moral state was still very difficult. "Mom, what about Camille?" he asked, as soon as he recovered from the operation and began to recover. She called. "You told her we went abroad for the operation." "Son," Evelyn said quietly. "Camille said she's filing for divorce. I think she's already come to Russia and started to decide." "Mom, how can that be?" Stephen was at a loss for words. He couldn't believe that Camille had done it. "I had hoped to the last moment that it wouldn't happen. But there must be some humanity in her. Is it okay that I'm against it, or do my opinions not count?" "I was hoping she was just saying that out of spite. She's been so angry with me lately. But I can understand it. It's a lot to carry around a family for so long. Son, that's not what you need to be thinking about right now. Forget about your health. Forget about her. Let her live as she knows how. If she wants to get married, let her get married. We can't stop her from doing anything anyway. Just try not to think about her anymore. Think of yourself. You need the strength to get on with your life now, and Camille will sort it out for herself." Although Stephen knew that Camille intended to divorce him, he did not take his wife's words seriously. He was ready to forgive her relationship with another man. It was all completely unimportant. But that she would decide to divorce him, he couldn't believe it. But how could she? He loved her so much. Even when they fought, Stephen never thought of breaking up. Camille was the only woman in his life that he loved madly. "You don't understand, Mom," he said. "How am I going to live without her? Maybe you could call her, talk to her, find out what really happened in France, who she's going to marry, whatever. It's very important to know." "Mom, please." I didn't even have time to ask how it happened. "Son, leave this story, I beg you very much. We'll be there soon. Home. You'll start a whole new life. It's not worth rehashing the past. She made this decision. She had to take responsibility for it." Deep down, Evelyn hated Camille even more. She'd never been very happy with her son's choice, and after what she'd done, she had nothing but contempt for the girl. "What a bunch of girls," Jenna complained. "Nowadays, try to leave a sick husband to his fate. Yes, in the best case finger-pointing, and in the worst case even imagine terrible. No one would have given you a hand. And now, if she wanted to, she got married. If she wanted to, she got divorced. You can go and get divorced several times a year, and no one will say a word to you." She understood and shared her daughter's feelings, and also did not find a place, worried about Stephen. Sometime after returning to Russia, Christopher intervened in the situation. "Women, I never gave you advice and I'm not going to do it now, but still," he said, when for the first time in a long time Evelyn let him cross the threshold of their house. Whatever he was and whatever had happened between them in the past, she was very grateful to her ex-husband for paying for Stephen's surgery. It was scary to imagine what would have happened to him if Christopher had not intervened in the situation. She would probably be mourning her Stephen by now. So, Christopher continued, "He is no longer a boy, but a grown man. Illness, divorce, it can happen to anyone. No one is immune to it. But how to treat it is up to the man himself. Let him be sad mad. He should experience it all inside himself and make a decision himself. Do not think about Camille and do not grind the joint past round the clock." For the first months after his return to Russia, Stephen practically did not leave his room, even ate and drank once in a while. And no matter how Evelyn tried to influence the situation, it only got worse. He wouldn't talk to anyone, and as soon as his grandmother or mother tried to bring him out of his depression or said something bad, he got angry and snapped at her. "Don't feel sorry for me," he told his mother when she once again came to his room to offer him something to eat or drink tea. I know everything myself. A worthless invalid who turned out to be of no use to anyone. It happens. You're probably going to say it can happen to anyone. But for some reason, it happened to me. Don't you dare say that. Evelyn was very angry when her son blamed himself for Camille leaving, and she couldn't hide her emotions, no matter how hard she tried. She wanted very much to support Stephen, but she didn't know how or how she could help him. First of all, you're not an invalid and never have been. And secondly, you're not worthless. But look around you, there are so many interesting things in the world, so many beautiful women worthy of your love. You'll still be fine if you stop sitting alone in four walls and get busy. Christopher was in complete agreement with Evelyn, so when she asked him to have a heart-to-heart talk with Stephen, he readily agreed. "Stephen, I'm not going to feel sorry for you like Mom and Grandma do," he said firmly. "I'm offering you a good way out of your life situation. I'm sure it will suit you. Let's go to the sea, relax, have fun. There are lots of interesting places in Russia. There's plenty to see. We'll buy train tickets, arrange a real full-fledged tourist vacation, beach discos, new acquaintances. You're still so young, aren't you?" "Yes, and I could use a rest, and I've been working for several years without a vacation." After listening to his father, Stephen for the first time in a long time thought that both his mother and grandmother are right. Indeed, he sits in four walls all alone and makes himself and his loved ones sad. After all, just recently he was on the verge of life and death. After reflecting for a few days on everything that is happening in his life, he agreed to go to the sea with his father. "Do you want us to take Mom and Grandma with us?" asked Christopher. "I think so," Stephen replied. "I think it would be wrong if we went on vacation just the two of us. They deserve a vacation too." Evelyn hesitated for a long time whether she should go. Why is he being so nice all of a sudden?" she asked Jenna. "He wants us all to go to the sea. Is there some kind of trick in it?" "You're not making up nonsense, Olia," she replied. "She's a man who sincerely wants to help us." "He has already helped us." "Yes, albeit with its own nuances. He may have saved a lot of money. But he has helped us. And if it wasn't for him, would we have saved our Stephen? Even if we'd sold the apartment, we wouldn't have had enough money. And now he's helping a beggar. There's no catch to it at all." She was a very shrewd and intelligent woman and watched closely how Christopher was changing literally before her eyes. Evelyn didn't notice it because her memories were alive with the not-so-nice moments of their past together. Jenna had always remembered it too, but after Christopher had helped Stephen, she had begun to view him and his actions differently. This trip changed their lives, and they didn't even expect it to turn out this way. Making reservations, paying for the tickets. Christopher for the first time caught himself thinking that he was not thinking about money as he always had. "Let's settle up with you right away so we don't have to go back to it later," Evelyn said. "And we'll plan our budget for the trip. Who pays for what, how much to contribute, where we'll live, we'll discuss at once, so that there will be no misunderstandings later." "What are you?" Christopher answered, surprised. "Do not need any money. I invited you and I will pay for everything." "What can we talk about?" He caught himself thinking that he enjoyed taking care of them, of the grown-up son to whom he had given so much as a child, despite the fact that he was socializing with him. About Evelyn, whom he had not done the best thing to at one time. And even Jenna's smile gave him warm feelings. He didn't know how to explain it even to himself. For most of his life, Christopher was sure that family was a burden that would only interfere with work and development. But years had passed. Most of his friends have not only been married for a long time, but are also raising grandchildren. And he remained alone. It's not that he was greatly burdened by it. Sometimes he couldn't even fully understand how he felt about his own loneliness. And after everything that had happened, he began to think more and more often that he hadn't been living right. And it wasn't because he had been prioritizing work since his student years, but because his life lacked responsibility for anyone but himself. He had always lived according to the principle of a kind of freedom, the limits of which he had invented for himself. But he thought about it too late. Christopher was convinced that it was impossible to change his life completely, even if he wanted to. Old habits would still remain. But after a while he realized how wrong he was when he thought that way. It turned out to be completely different and much simpler than he could have imagined. "Sorry, I almost blew you off," Stephen said, noticing the girl he had almost bumped into. That afternoon he took a long walk down the street, breathing fresh air and completely absorbed in his thoughts. Stephen did not even notice how dark it was outside. He didn't want to go back to the small house they had rented right on the beach. Stephen had noticed that Evelyn and Christopher had grown closer over the past week. He didn't want to disturb them. Jenna had found several companions with whom she spent days shopping, going to the beach, and touring local attractions. That evening, one of the woman's friends invited her to her house, and Stephen, after spending the whole day at the beach, went to a cafe and then went for a walk around the city. "It's nothing," the girl replied. "It's a resort here. Things happen. But you look a little sad." "I'm sorry, perhaps I'm minding my own business, but I can't help but ask you what's wrong." Stephen didn't know what to say to her, so he just didn't say anything. He didn't know why she asked that. Did she? Does she think that a person would want to share his worries with a stranger he met by chance on the street? He thought to himself. But the girl was clearly not going to leave. For a few minutes they stood looking at each other. Then she said, "Let's go somewhere to sit. I'm the one who's all alone here. I want someone to talk to, I've never been to a resort before. I haven't had the time or the desire. This year I wanted to. So it was vacation time and I decided to come here." Stephen didn't understand what she wanted from him. That evening he was not looking for company, but wanted to spend time alone with himself. But looking at the kind, open girl, who sincerely wanted to talk to him, he could not refuse. Already in half an hour they were sitting in a coastal night restaurant and talking about life. By morning when they were leaving, Stephen caught himself thinking that he liked Emily very much. He walked her straight to the hotel, and for another hour he walked around the city. By the time he got home, the sun was shining brightly outside. "Son, where have you been?" asked Evelyn, who was making breakfast in the kitchen. "Your father and I called you, but for some reason your cell phone was unavailable. I wondered if something was wrong. What do you want, warning me if you're not going to come home and spend the night? It's a foreign city, and I'm worried about you." "My battery's dead," Stephen replied nonchalantly. "I didn't have a charger with me." He realized she was lying, and he and Christopher weren't so much worried about Stephen as they were that he wouldn't come back too suddenly. Evelyn was still trying to hide from both mother and son that she had renewed feelings for Christopher. She was afraid to admit it to herself. Too much water had passed. "But I'm not a little boy anymore," Stephen said, winking at her. "I'm a grown man and I understand everything perfectly well. Could you have told me on the beach that you wanted to be alone together? I'd think of something to do at night. There's always something to do in a resort town. What are you implying?" Evelyn was embarrassed. "Go on, wash your hands. And it's time for breakfast. And go to your father, wake him up, because the prospectus all breakfast, and then we'll again on the beach to treat a piece." Jenna didn't get home until the afternoon. She was shining with happiness. She had never had such an interesting time. "Imagine we were there taking things apart," she said with delight. "She's been doing this for a long time, knitting things to sell. I'm so excited. I think I need to find something to do to keep me busy too." For the past few years, Jenna couldn't find a worthwhile use for herself. It seemed to her that at her age, all normal people should be busy with their great-grandchildren, not thinking about their own lives. What was happening in the family was depressing. The woman couldn't think of anything else. But when Stephen was cured and recovered, and their divorce ceased to be the main topic of discussion behind family grudges and wives, she caught herself thinking that the past problems had receded into the background. She observed her daughter's behavior as well, and in a way she was happy for her. Each day they grew closer to Christopher, and one day Jenna decided to have this conversation with Evelyn. It happened on the last day of the vacation, when all the things were packed. Christopher had left to go shopping for souvenirs and Stephen had invited Emily for one last resort outing. "Olia, but I can see what's going on," she said when they were alone in the house. "Why do you? It's more complicated than that. If you have something in the past that did not work out, it does not mean that a person should not give another chance." "What are you talking about, Mom?" Evelyn realized that she could no longer hide her feelings for Christopher from her mother. So she decided to talk to her openly. "You couldn't stand him. Don't you remember when you were young and you tried so hard to talk me out of marrying him? Said he was no good for me. Why did you suddenly change your attitude toward Christopher?" She couldn't explain to herself how or when it happened. Jenna had always relied on her own in all matters of life, which this time told her that Christopher had changed. I don't know, Olga, honestly I don't know. But the one who remembers the old is the one who's out of sight. And I don't know what it was like when you were young. You're old enough to understand. We all do stupid things when we're young. No one lives their life perfectly, and Christopher is no exception. If you're starting to develop a relationship, why not give it a try? You're both such mature, realized people. You look at life differently. He's changed. It's entirely possible that you can build your relationship differently now. I'll think about what I said, Mom, Evelyn said. You may be right, but I think it's too soon to say anything serious. I don't mind seeing him, spending time with him sometimes, but not living with him. We're not young enough to move in together or go to the registry office. It's our lot to babysit grandchildren. They're building a family. Jenna strongly disagreed with her, but did not argue. The woman was sure that time would put everything in its place. One way or another, sooner or later it would happen anyway. Jenna knew that for sure. As well as the fact that no man could influence it. There are things that happen on their own, regardless of anything or anyone. Well, should we say goodbye? Said Stephen, sitting with Emily on the shore. It was nice to meet you. You are a very nice, pleasant person. I wish you good luck. He was about to get up and leave, but she took his hand and said, let's sit a little longer. It's such a nice evening. I wish it would never end. She had grown very attached to Stephen over the past 2 weeks. He hadn't even noticed the moment when he wanted to tell her his story. Emily listened attentively to him and sincerely empathized. I don't understand how you can abandon a loved one in such a difficult situation, she said. I would never do that. Career can wait. You can always change profession. This journalism is not the end of the world, but family is sacred. You can't betray your family. Those were not empty words. Emily grew up in a very difficult environment and experienced firsthand what it is like when there is no family. Her mom raised her alone. She never knew her father. He left her mom as soon as she told him she was pregnant. In Emily's entire life, she had never even once seriously considered finding him and finding out how he was and what he was doing. Getting to know him, talking to him every time she broached the subject. Her mother would guffaw and ask her to stop talking about it, and Emily had no choice but to comply. She didn't want to fight with her closest person over nothing. The family situation seriously affected both Emily's outlook and psychological state. She always clearly remembered the words of her mother, which she said to her when she was 18 years old, and never brought up the subject again. Anything. But I beg you not to marry and have children. You've ruined your whole life. Learn from my example, daughter. I have not seen life at all, because I gave birth to you early and all my youth was devoted to your upbringing. And now the time has passed. It's too late to change anything. Emily was very hurt to hear her mother's words. She had the impression that she did not love her at all, and even regretted that she was born. In fact, it was not so. But the woman did not want such a fate for her daughter. She wanted Emily to get an education and both build her life in the family. And you'll always have time to have children. This in general in life is not the main thing, said the mother. Emily listened to her. She was afraid of serious relationships. All her romances ended in complete failure. As soon as it came to family and children, Emily tried to avoid the topic, and when it did not work, broke off the relationship, which left in the depths of her soul huge wounds that she did not even try to heal. Sometime after breaking up with another man, she fully immersed herself in her work, and over time the heavy memories disappeared. Only sometimes, when Emily had free time, she seriously thought that something in her life was going wrong. But she didn't want to change anything. It was too hard and complicated for her. So Emily tried to chase away from herself those difficult thoughts that arose in her head. But it couldn't go on like this forever. They sat on the shore, holding hands, until late at night. It seemed to them that there was no one in the world but them. Stephen had never felt so light and calm in his life. It seemed to him as if all movement around him had stood still. The bustle and anxiety had receded into the background, and he wished very much that it could last forever. But dawn could not wait. It came right on schedule. Exactly when it was supposed to. In a few hours, Stephen would be leaving this town, and probably for good. I didn't ask for your phone number, he said. I'd hate to lose touch with you. I also didn't ask where you were from. Listening to you and me talk so much that we almost missed the most important thing. Stephen laughed and Emily picked up her phone and asked him to dictate a number. Now about the calls. All right, Emily said, and he dipped his hand into his pockets and again found that his phone was authorized. What the hell is going on? I don't understand. It's like there's something wrong with him. He's always irritable. Maybe not with him, but with you. Emily smirked. When was the last time you charged your phone? Stephen remembered that he had last plugged his phone into the net more than 2 days ago. Right? Indeed, to the right. What am I doing? Okay, you dictate. Then this is how I memorize it. And as soon as I get home and put my phone on charge, I'll text you about the ringing. Emily's dictation of the numbers was ingrained in his memory. Stephen did not even have to repeat it twice. He memorized them immediately, like his date of birth and other important events in his life. When he got home, he immediately dialed her, and they talked for several more hours, saying goodbye. Only after Christopher came into the room did he say, "Son, stop pulling us out already. We are now late for the train. You stay here. The landlady has already arrived. It's time for us to turn the house in. Stephen would be ready to stay here forever if this town was desirable. But Emily, as well as Stephen, left after a few days. It was time for her to get back to work." All the way back, Stephen heard the clatter of the wheels, looked out the window, and thought of Emily. Or for the first time in a long time, he did not think of Camille. And, catching himself at that thought, he was greatly relieved. He had not even expected that he would ever meet her again. He no longer loved her or needed her. When Stephen was about to go to bed, his thoughts were interrupted by his father, his son. "When you get to town, you have to decide what you are going to do next," Christopher said. "You will not continue to sit at home with your mother and grandmother. There are plenty of interesting things to do. I think you should really think about your future." "Yes, Dad, I'll think about it. But we're not going to talk about it on the road. In fact, stop talking to the whole car and close the compartment doors. People want to sleep on the top shelf." Stephen instantly fell asleep. He will definitely think not only about the future, but also return to his past for a moment to put a final point in it. Only he didn't know it then, 5 years later. "What do you think it will be, a boy or a girl this time?" Emily asked, walking with Stephen out of the hospital. "I would like a girl, of course," answered the man with a wink. "We already have a son, but the terms are still small. We don't know who we will have. We will be in pleasant anticipation." They found out that they were expecting their second child and were over the moon. Their son was born almost immediately after they got married, and their relationship grew rapidly after meeting in a resort town. After they went home, they called each other every day. Stephen heeded his father's advice and immediately upon his return began to master design. He always liked this direction, but he never dared to admit it to himself. After a year of dense, painstaking work on his own projects, he became one of the best designers in his city. He was asked to design apartments and houses, and even offices. He had finally made it in life and could be proud of himself. Looking at her son, Evelyn could not be pleased. "Finally, all the trials in my boy's life were over," she told Christopher with a happy smile on her face. Their relationship had mended, too. A year after returning home, they made the decision to start over. "I'm sure we have plenty of time to correct the mistakes of our youth," Christopher said as he proposed to Evelyn. The wedding was modest but very sincere, romantic, just like Stephen's with Emily. They got married on the same day and invited only the closest people. "I always thought that happiness loves silence," Jenna said. "There's no need for all this grandstanding and showmanship. The most important thing is that we finally have a complete and loving family." She became seriously interested in embroidery, and for a whole year after returning from the resort, she created sketches. It turned out that throughout her life, Jenna had dreamed of discovering her artistic talent, but due to the hectic weekdays, she had never been able to do it. "Mom, now is the best time for self-realization," supported her Evelyn. When Jenna shared her plans with her, she wanted to open her own workshop for custom embroidered paintings. And 2 years later, when the first works were ready, she organized her first exhibition. "You see," Stephen said, "and you didn't believe in yourself?" "I didn't. You said you were an old grandmother, but how old are you?" You've got your whole life ahead of you. You'll give us all a head start." What's true is true. Jenna was full of energy and strength. She had so many plans that sometimes she didn't even have time to realize them in time. Sometimes she cringed, which Evelyn, Stephen, and Emily were sarcastic about. "I've been working and working," Jenna said. "But my great-grandson is growing up. I owe my great-grandchildren. It seems to me, otherwise what kind of grandmother would I be? Oh, I'm not a very good grandmother." Emily and Stephen always laughed at those words because they knew they were sarcastic. In fact, Jenna was happy that she had found a job that she enjoyed and excelled at. She spent enough time with her son to be called a good grandmother. Emily and Stephen didn't need any help. He worked, and she never took a step away from her young son. And when they found out that they were expecting a second child, Stephen began to protect his wife even more from unnecessary worries and troubles. "Are you sure that everything will be all right?" he asked worriedly when they left the hospital. The doctor didn't say anything. "Don't take offense, but you and I are not so young anymore." "No, not in the sense that we are old, but that you are 35 years old. I don't know what kind of complications, health problems. If you want, we can go abroad for a full hospitalization. You'll be under medical supervision all the time until the birth, and we'll come back with the baby." Stephen treasured Emily very much. She was for him not just a wife, but a person who at one time gave him a new meaning of life. "You literally saved me," he once confessed. "If it hadn't been for you, I don't know how my life would have turned out after all I had been through." "You pulled me out of a swamp like that?" "Come on, you exaggerated," Emily joked back. "I just gave you a push, and then you did everything on your own. But you have to admit, even if you and I hadn't, you still would not have been able not to suffer for your girlfriend for the rest of your life. You'd meet another woman, fall in love. What are your years?" Over the years, Stephen never once thought of his ex-wife as if she had never been in his life. Sometimes Stephen had the feeling that everything that happened to him was some kind of terrible dream, from which he could not wake up for many years. It was only after Emily and his favorite business had appeared, and the relations in his family had mended, that he began to live fully, not to exist. They were walking through the noble hospital grounds, which rather resembled an equipped recreation area. For the first time in a long time, Stephen noticed how much his hometown had changed and transformed in recent years. His thoughts were interrupted by a painfully familiar woman sitting on a bench. She was no longer as beautiful as she had been a few years ago. She wore a shawl on her head, and she looked sad and depressed. "Stephen, what are you stopping for?" Emily yelled at him. "Something's wrong." "Look, please wait for me on a nearby bench," he replied. "I need to talk to someone." Emily was indignant. She looked at her husband reproachfully for the first time in a long time, and even seriously wanted to tell him what she thought about it. "What do you mean, wait for me on the next bench? What the hell is this? Is he hiding something from me?" she thought to herself. Seeing his wife's displeasure, Stephen began to reassure her and decided to pout like a mouse on the grits. He asked her affectionately, taking her hand, "But I really need to talk to someone. Are you keeping secrets from me? Are you hiding something?" she asked. "I just don't understand why I don't need to hear it. You and I are always and everywhere together, supporting each other in everything. And now you have met some acquaintance with whom you suddenly need to talk urgently without me. How am I supposed to understand that? And it's not some stranger, it's my ex-wife, Camille. Can I at least go up to her and say hello? Let's go together." "Okay, just so you're calm. Let's do this." Stephen sincerely did not understand his wife's sudden outburst of emotion. Emily had always been so correct, so courteous. What had suddenly come over her? She certainly had no reason to doubt him. He loved only her alone, and she knew it and never made a scene of jealousy. Emily, on the other hand, caught herself that she was disgusted to see this woman. Like the fact that Stephen had decided to approach her, he could have just walked past her, pretending not to recognize her, and it wouldn't have been a big deal. After all, it had been so many years. "Hello, Camille," Stephen said quietly, sitting down beside her on the bench. "I saw you and thought I'd come over and say hello. It's been so long since I've seen you." She recognized Stephen at once, but could not hide her surprise. He was not the same young man she had married and lived with for several years under the same roof. He had changed a great deal in the years they had not seen each other, and it wasn't just his looks. There was something about him that was so elusive. Inwardly, he was a completely different person, and it was impossible not to notice it. "Hello, Stephen," Camille answered. "I didn't expect to see you here." "I could say the same about you," he said. Stephen noticed Camille's unhealthy appearance, grayish complexion, huge circles under her eyes. She looked like a seriously ill person, and it was so obvious that it was impossible to hide it from view, even if one tried very hard. "What are you doing here? Did you come to register too?" "Not exactly. There's an oncology clinic right next door." Camille said it with such sadness and doom in her voice that Stephen couldn't just get up and leave. He no longer had any feelings for this woman, but humanly he felt very sorry for Camille. Her fate had indeed turned out tragically, but deep down she knew she deserved it. For her short life, she had made so many mistakes that they would be more than enough for several people. Her relationship with the Frenchman had frayed almost immediately after the wedding. She believed that the honeymoon would be the happiest period of her life. But everything turned out to be completely different from what she had imagined. Bernard turned out to be a very powerful and unscrupulous man. Camille couldn't even imagine what he was really like. When they were dating, he was sensitive, attentive, and caring. But after they got married, he started acting like a tyrant. "You can keep your opinions to yourself," he told her a week after the wedding, when she asked why they hadn't gone on a trip around the world. "If you think I'm going to spend money on nonsense, you're very much mistaken. I am the boss in our family, and only I will decide what we will do, where we will go, and how we will live." After these words, Camille immediately thought about divorce. Being proudly principled, she would never allow herself to be treated like that. But it wasn't that simple. Bernard wasn't about to give in. Divorce wasn't in his plans. "What, you decided to embarrass me in front of my friends, partners?" he said harshly. When Camille said that she planned to divorce and return to Russia, "Do you seriously think I'm a little boy who will play by your rules? Don't even think about it. You're not going anywhere. I am your lawful husband and you will stay with me and obey me." Camille was saved only by the fact that she was a Russian citizen. On the day that this conversation took place between them, Bernard was very angry, so he did not pounce. Camille pretended to put up with it and even apologized to her husband, waiting for the night when he would leave the house ostensibly to meet with his partners. She packed her bags, drove to the airport, and flew to Russia, where her mother met her. "Oh my God, how could it be, my daughter?" Wendy lamented. "What a mess you've gotten yourself into." The very next day, Camille called her boss and informed him that she would not return to France, as it could jeopardize her life and health. But the story with her husband did not convince the man that she should stay in Russia. "So what now? What does work have to do with it?" he asked. "Well, if you don't fly to Paris tomorrow, I'll fire you. You'll then work all your life in some lousy local newspaper in your own Mukosransk. Forget about your career." Those words sounded like a judgment. Wendy insisted that her daughter not go anywhere, with great difficulty, but she managed to convince Camille not to do such a rash thing. "Don't you dare," her mother said harshly. "You don't know what that asshole has in mind. As long as you are in your own country, you are completely protected. If you go back there, there's no telling what will happen. It's scary to imagine what he's capable of." 2 weeks later, Camille quit her job. The boss cooled down and taught her past merits, so he allowed her to write a letter of resignation. But the turmoil did not end there. For several months, Camille was in a deep depression, and when she began to feel quite bad, went to the doctor. "I don't want to live," she said after hearing the terrible diagnosis. "Why is it like this? Do not want to want. There is such a word. You have to," Wendy said. "Others survive, and you will. And don't you dare even think otherwise." They'd been chasing those thoughts for 5 long years. Camille fought desperately for her life, but with each passing day she saw less and less sense in it. "The doctors say the only thing to do now is to go abroad," she said quietly, looking at Stephen. "They've already done everything they can. And we have no money. What's there abroad? I'm working writing essays for magazines all over the country, and I still don't have enough money for anything. Well, it was nice to see you. I'm gonna go. And, Stephen, please forgive me for everything. If you can. Wait, don't go. I'll help you. Tell me how much you need." "Money. I have an opportunity. Really, I can help." Camille looked at her ex-husband with eyes full of tears, and couldn't believe that she was hearing those words from him now. She felt so ashamed of what she had done to him a few years ago. "Have you decided to take up charity?" asked Emily Stephen when he had told her all about it. "I don't understand you. She left you, betrayed you. And you're going to help her and solve it?" "It's my moral duty," calmly answered Stephen. "You can't be like those people who once did you wrong. You have to be kinder and help as much as possible." Emily accepted her husband's decision, but could only come to terms with it in time. A month later, Camille underwent surgery abroad, and another 6 months later she returned to Russia after recovery. During this time, Stephen and her father had built a large house where they all moved in together. There was a month left until she, the light, was due. Daughter Stephen and Emily were perfectly happy, especially Stephen. There was nothing more he could have wished for. A few years ago, he could not have imagined that his life would turn out in such a wonderful way.